All right. Thanks so much to everyone who could make it out here tonight. We do really appreciate it. I want to introduce myself. My name is Michael Lindner. I am the Vice President of the Young Americans for Freedom chapter here at Texas A&M. I am a graduate student in the Master's in Business Administration program, and it is an honor for our group to host such an incredible conservative speaker here tonight, Dinesh D'Souza. Dinesh is a writer, scholar, and public intellect. He has become an award-winning filmmaker. Born in India, D'Souza came to the US as an exchange student at the age of 18. Graduated Phi Beta Kappa from Dartmouth College. Called one of the top young public policy makers of our time, D'Souza quickly became known as a major force in policy through his books, speeches just as the one here tonight, and films. He is a man of searching and versatile intellect. He is a man who can bridge cultures. Dinesh D'Souza was born in Mumbai, India, and has truly lived the American dream. He moved to the United States to attend school on a Rotary scholarship, and following graduation from Dartmouth College, he went to work at the Reagan White House as a policy analyst. D'Souza has served as the John Olin Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and the Fellowship of Robert Rishwain at Stanford University. He's been named one of America's most influential conservative thinkers by the New York Times, and he recently released a movie called Death of a Nation in August. It is now streaming on all platforms and available for purchase on Amazon. It was one of the most influential political movies of the year. This lecture tonight is part of the Young America's Foundation exclusive 10-campus tour titled The Dinesh D'Souza Tour, Fake History Debunked. The generous sponsors of this lecture tour ask that I share the following statement explaining why it is important that we all hear from such a great speaker tonight. Here it is. Students deserve to receive an education based on unbiased facts, not revisionist history. Sadly, too many students today benefit from a robust understanding of the ideas and events that shape our world, because too few schools offer perspectives that challenge the leftist worldview. This is not education, it's indoctrination. And it's not just unfair to students, it is dangerous. We are alarmed that today's young people are taught to believe that freedom, the great protector against tyranny, should be forfeited in pursuit of this progressive agenda. Sponsoring this 10-campus lecture tour to give you the opportunity to consider ideas that may not be taught or even tolerated on your campus. You will be hearing from Dinesh D'Souza today, one of the most intellectual, articulate, courageous scholars. We are pleased to partner with Dinesh and Young America's Foundation to reach thousands of young people to inspire you to pursue knowledge, challenge leftist information, and advance freedom and prosperity for all. May tonight's lecture inspire you to never stop learning. Thank you.
He's a man of a searching and versatile intellect. He is a man who can bridge cultures and understands history and scholarship and politics and theology and philosophy.
My guest this week is an author, a filmmaker, a former policy advisor to Ronald Reagan.
Mr. Dinesh D'Souza.
This American dream is a dream not just of economic opportunity or success, but it's ultimately a dream where you can be the architect of your own destiny.
I grew up in a different world, actually a world without America. And although I grew up without a phone, without television, without hot water, we had a car, but if you looked down the floor of our car, you could see the ground.
He's been described as an influential conservative thinker. He's a best-selling author, political commentator, and filmmaker.
The great man, Dinesh D'Souza,
a patriotic man.
No longer would I say that I live in a rarefied world of intellectual debate. I've seen the upside of America, and I've seen the downside of America. But at the end of the day, I wouldn't trade the United States for any other country. At the end of the day, my enthusiasm for American government may have dimmed, but my enthusiasm for this country burns brighter than ever. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dinesh D'Souza.
Howdy. I know some of you are looking a little surprised. You're like, howdy, this guy's really with it, man. He's got it all down. Pretty soon it's going to be Gig 'em Aggies. And if you're wondering why I'm so cool and how I kind of know the lingo, it's because I actually have a stepdaughter who goes here. Aha! So without further ado, Miss Juliana. I'm also thrilled to be here with my wife, Debbie. She's an immigrant from Venezuela, as I am from India. And what you're going to hear this evening from me is, well, you could call it the immigrant perspective. It's a different angle of looking at America, American politics, and American history. And we're doing this at a moment in which American politics has entered a very peculiar and even surreal phase. And trying to make sense of this divide, this Cold War, if you will. Not a civil war, but maybe a cold civil war, a secession of the American mind, one that occurs not between the North and the South, but one that occurs throughout the country, not just between so-called red and blue America, but inside every county, and in some cases inside every family, and in a few cases right inside the human heart itself, a divide over what this country is really all about. I was 17 years old when I first saw the United States. I remember the plane descending on JFK. I looked out of the window, I could see the New York skyline, I could see the Statue of Liberty. And a really strange feeling came over me. I felt in my bones that my life was going to be completely different from that moment on. I felt that I was moving from the margin of the world to the center. I recognized, even without ever thinking about politics, without knowing anything about America, that I was coming to a country in which I would be able to be the architect of my own destiny. I was moving to a place where I could write the script of my own life. And this to me was my American dream. This to me was what made America unique. And in all my interactions with other people, fellow Indians all trying to get here, one way or the other, I got a feeling for what that America's recognized worldwide to be special. I have a friend of mine who has been actually trying to emigrate here from Mumbai for I think now almost 20 years. And the poor guy has never been able to do it. And so finally on the phone I said to him, hey, why are you so eager to come to America? He goes, Dinesh, I really want to move to a country where the poor people are fat. And for him, as for many, America represents abundance, the abundant life, the full life. And yet, I have seen in my own life the other side of America. If I fast forward to a few years ago, I was standing in a courtroom and I heard a bailiff bark out the following phrase: United States of America versus Dinesh D'Souza. Now, that is not a phrase that any immigrant wants to hear. It sends a chill down your spine. I was in a situation, I had exceeded the campaign finance law in donating to a college friend of mine, and as a result, the full force of the US government, in that case the Obama administration, came down on me. Batteries of FBI agents, reading my books, going through my tax returns, looking at my bank records, going over years. And it's a very ugly process. I say that because here's the US government and here's me. Did you exceed the campaign finance law? Yes, I did. And I should receive the same penalty as anybody else who did the same thing. To which they reply, not so fast. We're going to get you on bank fraud. I go, bank fraud? They go, yeah, because you took your money out of your bank account. And I go, whoa. And then they go, we're going to get you on mail fraud. And I go, mail fraud? They go, yeah, because you put the check in the mail. And I'm like, whoa. And I suddenly realized that there was a whole thing going on in which they were taking what I did, a simple act of trying to help a friend, misguidedly, but nevertheless, without any corrupt motive. They were redescribing the same thing 7 different ways and attaching a separate, serious federal charge involving prison time to each of these actions. The same thing redescribed 7 ways. And if you add it up, I was looking at years and years in prison, which they assured me will A, destroy your life, B, destroy your career, C, ruin your relationship with your family. And then they said, but we will drop these charges if you plead guilty and sign over here. And the moment you do, they hold a press conference and they go, see, he admitted it. He voluntarily said he did it. So in fact, they have legally bludgeoned you into submission. And by the way, this legal pressure applies equally whether you're guilty or not. And having done that, they triumphantly use your plea as proof that you are guilty. Now, I say all this because it's important to realize that when you watch the news, Paul Manafort, Michael Cohen, you have to realize that what you're seeing is the tip of the iceberg. All of this stuff is going on behind closed doors. And it's going on in every single case. So this is also America. This is the other side of America. And I would say this is screwed up America, and I've seen it firsthand. Now, for me, in a sense, the clouds did eventually part. A few months ago, I was in my office doing work, and the phone rang. I picked it up. It was the White House operator. Is this Mr. D'Souza? Hold the line for the President of the United States. Who comes on but Trump? And he was in a very Trumpian mood. He goes, hey, Dinesh, I'm sitting right here with John Kelly. You know John Kelly, don't you? I'm like, I don't know John Kelly. I know who he is, the chief of staff. And this was the moment in which I learned I was going to get a presidential pardon, which was a nice thing to get. And you know, I almost felt a slight tear welling up in my cheek because so many thoughts were running through my mind. Admittedly, the first thought was actually not even about me. As soon as Trump said, I'm going to do it, I thought to myself, this is a giant up yours to Obama. I saw that right away. But of course, the other part of it wasn't just that I would no longer have a probation officer monitoring my travel and come into my house. I wouldn't have to ask a judge for permission. I wouldn't have interminable commute. Forget all that. The most important thing was it gave me my American dream back. So it restored, in that sense, my full American dream. And so, having seen all of this up close, I now want to pull back and try to give a feeling for what's going on in America now. Now, I'm a product of the Reagan years. I became a conservative in the 1980s. Why? Because I saw this character, Reagan, a genial, affable, self-deprecating guy, a guy with a wonderful and you may say collegial sense of humor. At one point, this was in the 1982 recession, Reagan was cornered by Sam Donaldson of ABC News. Some of you will be old enough to remember. Sam Donaldson was, an adversary of Reagan. He was sort of the Wolf Blitzer of his day. And he goes, "Mr. President, in this recession you have blamed the media, and you have blamed the economists, and you have blamed the Democratic Party, but does any of the blame belong to you?" And Reagan goes, "Well, yes, because for many years I used to be a Democrat." And I recall this episode now almost nostalgically because I remember even Sam Donaldson started laughing. There was a kind of reciprocity between the two men, and it was a time in American politics where you'd have Reagan over here, you'd have the Democratic Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill, over here, and the two of them would fight it out on policy, but they could totally be envisioned having a Guinness afterward. In other words, there was an Irish camaraderie between them, and that was the America of then. But that is actually not the America of now. And part of what we have to think about isn't just how is it that we have all this craziness? I mean, Antifa patrolling the campuses, threats of violence, talk about kicking the opposition. Where does all this come from? What's really going on? What really seems to have happened at the beginning is people are looking at the same thing, but they are interpreting it in such different ways that you almost wonder if there are two different lenses in the camera. You saw this with the Kavanaugh hearings. You saw the same facts were put out there for everyone to see. There were no additional facts that one side had, the other side didn't. No, but nevertheless, two sets of people totally convinced that they're totally right. And you see this in media. If you're conservative and right-wing, you're watching Fox News, Rush Limbaugh, talk radio. If you're on the left, NPR. So suddenly you have different media being supplied to the two different sides. And I want to try to get into this and try to explain what's going on. What's changed in America? Well, one thing that's changed is that in the 80s, I think, by and large, the debate in American politics was not about goals. It was only about means. And what I mean by that is if Reagan stood up and said, "I believe in an America that's strong. I want an America that is prosperous. I believe that technological capitalism creates the goose that lays the golden eggs. I want America to have influence all over the world, and I want America to be an example to the world. And I want people to look up to America, and I want America to be a magnet for all of humanity. I want the American recipe to be what everybody wants." And if this was the goal, you'd be hard-pressed to find a Democrat who really disagreed. Now, there were disagreements, but the disagreements over things like this. If America is prosperous, how should we split the pie? How should we divide up the golden eggs, if you will? Or if America is going to be an example to the world, should America do it alone, or America seek allies who can work together with us to achieve those goals? But the disagreement, as you can see, is over tactics and not over objectives. Today, the reason it's difficult to have bipartisanship, it's difficult to meet halfway, is it appears that the two sides want to go in opposite directions. So this is not like the 80s. In fact, this is more like, I would say, the 60s, but I don't mean the 1960s. I actually mean the 1860s. When in fact you had two sides who had radically irreconcilable goals. And it was very difficult in that time to figure out how do you find the middle. Now, having lived through America now for the better part of almost 2 generations, I try to ask myself, what is it in America that's really changed? And let me point to one thing that I think is helpful in trying to understand what we call the culture war. One thing that's changed dramatically is that from the beginning of America, from not just the founding, from before, all the way until I would say the 1950s, maybe the early 60s, there was a moral consensus in this country that there is a moral order in the universe that is external to us, that makes claims on us. Our job is to try to live up to the standards of that moral code. Now, there was some disagreement about what the moral code is. Obviously, Christians and Jews might disagree about what it is, but let's just take the 10 Commandments as representing this external moral code. If you went around in 1950 and approached Americans and said, hey, do you think the country would be better if everybody followed the 10 Commandments? 99% of all Americans would go, yeah. And it wouldn't even matter if you were Christian or Jewish. You could be a non-believer, and you'd answer, yeah. So this represented a shared agreement across the whole society. It reflected, if you will, the deep Judeo-Christian roots of this country. Now, this is not to say that everybody obeyed the moral code, but even if you didn't, even if you fell short, that was your standard. That's what you measured yourself against. So what has changed in America now, as I see it, and I see it especially with young people, and I'm sure it's true of many of you, is a shift in the source of morality. Now, a lot of older people don't understand this, and they will say, morality has gone to hell. America has seen a moral decline. And what I'm saying is something a little different, not just that we've seen a decline in morality, what we have seen is a change in what morality is and where it comes from. So a change in the locus or roots of morality. In other words, the change can be summarized this way, that in the past, Americans believed that morality is out there, and now we believe, many of us in America, that morality is in here. Morality now doesn't come from the external code, it comes from the inner self. And that means that when young people today, many of you, face a choice, and I don't just mean a deep moral conundrum, any choice. Should I, Juliana, go to law school or become a poet? Do I, Jim, love Sally? If you're trying to answer that question, how do you do it? Do you consult your parents or your pastor or God? Well, for a lot of young people today, none of the above. You dig into yourself, you look deep into the sort of inner self, that little being inside of you, to guide you authoritatively about what you should do and how you should be. And this is something that is kind of new in the world. In other words, the self as the ultimate adjudicator of morality. That's something kind of startling. My father would really not have understood it. I remember, in fact, going years back to my dad and saying, hey, Dad, I have been thinking about becoming a writer. He goes, son, I really think you should do something useful with your life. And I had to try to explain, because he said, isn't it a fact that you have been admitted to the Wharton Business School? And I go, yeah. He goes, well, why aren't you going? I go, well, Dad, so you see, I kind of feel called to be a writer. And what I was getting at was I was trying to describe the sense of self-fulfillment that I was searching in doing something that I really enjoyed. And my dad was like, let me summarize. You are saying that there is a little being that lives inside of you. Let's call him Little Dinesh. You appear to consult with this creature in making important decisions that will affect your life. And I realized in this conversation with my dad, it wasn't that he disagreed with me. He just didn't know what the hell I was talking about. He had no idea. Why? Because I was describing this morality of the inner self that was utterly alien to him, completely. A lot of the roots of our culture war are in this. Because when you think of an issue, whether it's pro-life, abortion, gay marriage, let's think about it. In the old days, if you mentioned gay marriage, someone would say, what are you talking about? Are you out of your mind? Consult the definition of marriage. Look at the external moral code. Remember that marriage has a lot of criteria. It has actually 3 fence posts. The first one is that both parties have to be adults. Second, there have to be 2. They can't be 7. Third, you have to be unrelated. You can't marry a sister. So there are all these fence posts that define marriage. And the fourth, one is a man, one's a woman. So that's the external code. And to people who have been raised in that code, they don't understand why we want to pull up one fence post and keep all the others intact. Because if the argument for pulling up one is good, why not pull up all of them? Why have marriage at all? But of course, to the person arguing for gay marriage, it's not about that at all. It's ultimately about something like this. I don't know if it's nature, I don't know if it's nurture, but this is who I am. In other words, it's an appeal to the inner self. And the inner self is the adjudicator, the referee, the final word, and it trumps, if I can use that phrase, it trumps the external code. So to me, these are the sort of moral roots of what we're arguing about. And you can help to see why we can't argue. It's more like two ships in the night because both sides are using a different moral lens. Now, into this complicated ethical thicket comes a large elephant in the living room, and his name is Donald J. Trump. Trump. And he comes in as president, and everybody is a little startled. Why? Because this is a very, to quote my wife, out there guy. He has a very unique approach to politics. Reagan was a man of priorities. Reagan would say, you can't change the world in 30 ways. You can change it in maybe 2 ways. Let's focus on the Soviet Empire, and let's focus on stagflation, which was a combination of stagnation and inflation. Let's focus on that. Leave everything else. Let it go. That's not Trump. This guy's fighting on every front. Here's tax reform. Here's the trade treaty. Here, let's nick away at Obamacare. Let's change the court. And while all this policy stuff is going on, let's swat Meryl Streep. Boom. Let's get us failing CNN, Saturday Night Live. This dude is fighting the political war and the cultural war both. Now, at the first glance, this appears to be insane. We didn't elect Trump to fight a culture war. But the truth of it is that Trump recognizes that the fight is not just between the Republican and the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party has 3 extremely powerful allies: academia, the media, and the entertainment industry. And this is the, you may call it, outer fringe of the Democratic Party that is actually more powerful than the Democratic Party itself and does the work of the Democratic Party, but does it in the name of neutrality. And so this is what the Republicans are up against. The other thing that's going on, which I think is very troubling, is the gangsterization of American politics that has occurred really in the last 10 years. And by the gangsterization of American politics, I mean this. It is the idea that the person who disagrees with you isn't your critic, he's your enemy. You have to shut him up or take him out. When I was dealing with the US government, this is the Holder Justice Department and this is the prosecutorial agency in New York, it was very clear to me that if they could have imprisoned me for a $20,000 donation with no benefit to myself, if they could have imprisoned me for 10 years, they would have been delighted to do it. Their goal, take this guy out. And people say, well, why would they want to take you out? And the answer was that just a few months earlier, I had made a movie about Obama, but it wasn't a critique of Obama's policies. I exposed Obama as a flagrant hypocrite. Why? He had been going all over the country saying, we are our brother's keeper. Very Obama-esque. And I went to Kenya, where I found his actual brother in a hut in Nairobi, where if you stretched your 2 arms, you would hit the walls. And walking through the muck, we sat down in an interview, and I asked his brother, what has Obama done to help you? And the guy goes, absolutely nothing. He hasn't lifted a finger to help me. And here I'm living in third world slumdog millionaire-style poverty. So to put this on the screen, well, it upset the president. And I should have, I was kind of dumb. I was an immigrant in a way. I was like, I should have realized that the empire is going to strike back. Now, frankly, when I go to campus and I tell people this, they go, Dinesh, come on, be ridiculous. I mean, what makes you think Obama even saw your dumb movie? What makes you think he cared about it? And I go, well, the reason I think he cared about it is that right after the movie came out, vituperative attacks began to appear every day, attacking me by name on a website that happened to be called BarackObama.com. That's kind of where I got the idea that I had pissed him off. Now, the thing about Trump, Trump is sort of the anti-Obama. And the thing about Trump is that he has very striking human failings that, peculiarly enough, turn out to be political virtues at this time. For example, Trump has, I think he would admit, a Himalayan ego. He's unbelievably conceited. And in fact, in my recent movie, Death of a Nation, I have a movie poster, and somewhat provocatively, I decided to merge the images of Lincoln and Trump. And it gives a lot of people a double take. They go, man, Dinesh, what were you thinking? Come on, Lincoln, Trump, are you nuts? But then it occurred to me, and their point, of course, is that how dare you put Trump in the same image with Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln. But then it occurred to me that probably Trump feels the same way. He probably comes in and goes, what? I've been compared with Lincoln? The guy in the tall hat? Dinesh, what are you thinking? So Trump is an egotist. But when you're a president and you're trying to get stuff done and you're being flayed on every platform every second of every day, not just by the Democrats, not just by the media, not just by every comedian in Hollywood, you're being knifed by people in your own party. It's really helpful in that environment to have the kind of secure ego that basically keeps you untouched, even while all this craziness is going on. So that is part of what gives Trump the confidence to plow ahead. The other thing about Trump is, I think you may have noticed this, that if you attack him, he is emotionally incapable of not attacking you back. He loves to do it. He can't help it. And it doesn't matter who you are. You can be an absolutely insignificant, think of somebody like Omarosa. Everybody's nightmare. Certainly every Republican's nightmare. If Omarosa came in the room, every Republican would go under the chair and wait for the woman to leave. But not Trump. Trump's ready. And so with Trump, what happens is this urge to hit back is, I agree from a human point of view, it's kind of a deficiency. I certainly we don't teach our children to do this. We teach them restraint, self-control, pick your fights. But interestingly, at this moment, I think for the Republican Party, the Republican Party has been nominating one Boy Scout after another. McCain, Romney. Romney is such an unbelievable Boy Scout. If I were writing his college recommendation to Texas A&M, it would begin with something like this: not since Jesus Christ. Not since. Squeaky clean. But here's the problem. The moment Romney comes onto the national stage, within 5 minutes, the left makes him into Lucifer. You're greedy, you're selfish, you're an exploiter. Where did you get $200 million? And Romney is on the defensive, up against the wall, explaining, apologizing. Now you notice that nobody makes this accusation against Trump. Nobody goes, hey Trump, where did you get $1 billion? Trump has more money than Romney. How did you get $1 billion? You can't do this to Trump, because if you do it, he'll sit you down and explain to you that he has $2 billion. He's a lot richer than you thought. So with Trump, this desire to hit back, I think, reflects a tendency in the Republican Party now to say, okay, if you gangsterize one side, the other side has to get tough. That's the sad reality of the situation. In other words, would we like to live in the kinder, gentler Reagan era that I grew up in? Yes. But that era is not here anymore. Reagan wouldn't understand it. He'd be a fish out of water, because the political waters are too roiled right now. But the one guy I think who would be completely at home in America today is Abraham Lincoln. Why? Because the waters were even more roiled when Lincoln came in. And Lincoln realized, a very moderate man, by the way, that there was a time to be extremely tough. In fact, when Lincoln was first elected, he was surrounded by Republicans. I call them the rhinos of 1860, Republicans in name only. And they were like, Lincoln, there's trouble ahead. You have to get rid of the platform that we Republicans campaigned on just a couple of months earlier. And Lincoln was like, what? They were like, yeah, we campaigned on stopping the spread of slavery, but that's not going to work right now. What we've got to do is take the Missouri Compromise line, the Mason-Dixon line, and push it out to California. North of the line, no slavery, ever. South of the line, slavery, forever. This was called the Crittenden Compromise. And Abraham Lincoln said, in effect, he said, I will suffer death. In other words, what he said was, over my dead body. Why? Because Lincoln said, we just had an election. We put this very issue before the American people. The American people, through an electoral majority, have decided the matter. This is not a matter of my having a mandate. It's not even my mandate. It's their mandate. And my job is to carry it out. And that is what we Republicans are going to do. Slavery was not ended by the abolitionists. They had no power to do it. They didn't even know how to begin to do it. Slavery was ended by the Republican Party through the Union armies in 1865. That's what brought it to an end. And Lincoln realized that throughout that process, he had to be extremely tough, and he had to stiffen the spine of the Republican Party. In fact, it came to his attention when the Union Army began to deploy black soldiers that when those soldiers were captured by the Confederacy, they were summarily shot. The Confederacy did not execute white soldiers who were normal prisoners of war, but if a black Union soldier was captured, he was killed. And when this came to Abraham Lincoln's desk, Lincoln issued an executive order, in my opinion, the most barbaric order to come out of the northern side of the war. For every black Union soldier executed by the Confederacy, one Confederate soldier will be summarily shot. Now, why would a moderate man like Lincoln do that? The reason is that Lincoln realized that there is only one way to make them stop. You have to do to them what they are doing to you. And if you don't do that, they'll keep doing it. And to apply this analogy in a different context now, take Antifa roaming the campus, bludgeoning speakers, causing universities to cancel events, block this and stop that. If you let that happen, the bottom line of it is they'll keep doing it. Why? Because that's how they define success. Success is stopping a rival point of view from being heard. And so it is of supreme importance not to let that succeed. Very recently, Condoleezza Rice was given a graduation speaking spot at a university in New Jersey. There was a protest. We'll disrupt her speech. We'll shout. And Condoleezza Rice, very ladylike, withdrew. I don't want to speak at any college that doesn't want to have me. And all the Republicans would cheer, very ladylike, very gracious, wonderful, what an example. But that's not my view of the matter. My view of the matter is that this is a disgraceful abdication. Why? Because if Condoleezza Rice can be canceled and speaking on a campus, no conservative will ever set foot on that campus again. If she is too much for them, who is not? And so what we have in America today, and we all know this to be true in our hearts, whatever our politics, there is a chill wind blowing through the world of American culture, politics, and ideas, and it suffocates you in saying what you think and being who you are and being able to speak your mind. Now, the more conservative you are, the more you feel this pressure. But every independent thinker who is not a slave to what you are told is going to feel this to some degree. And my bottom line message, I've said a lot of things here, but my bottom line message is, it is a part of your own human dignity, it is a part of your intellectual liberation not to put up with this nonsense anymore. And that means you have to figure out ways to undermine the culture of intolerance. And hey, people tell me, oh, Texas A&M is a conservative campus. Yes, it is, but it's even here. And the fact that there is the chill wind even here means you can just imagine how bad it is in other places where the left has more of a, not just a dominant position, a monopoly. When I was an undergraduate at Dartmouth in the early 80s, I could have named 10 conservative professors off the top of my head at Harvard. I knew them by name. I read their work. Today, I'd be hard-pressed to name one. And to my knowledge, there's not a single outspoken conservative in that entire university. They're having a big law case right now about diversity, and they keep chanting diversity this and diversity that, and we want to have gender diversity, and we want to have racial diversity, but the one kind of diversity they'll never mention is intellectual diversity, because they have very little of it. And that's the most important kind of diversity on a college campus. So I leave you with the thought that intellectual liberation and a way to understand what's going on. Here you are insulated from the world for 4 years, and your task is understanding. There'll be plenty of room to do other things later, but your task now is to concentrate on what's going on in the world and make sense of it, and you can't do it if your mind is being suffocated in this way. The Nazis actually called it Gleichschaltung. And I don't make the analogy lightly. I was actually in Munich and Nuremberg a few months ago filming Death of a Nation. And I saw an interesting sight in all these museums. They were talking about the Nazi era of people draping the swastika flag off their balcony or doing the Heil Hitler salute. And I watched it for a while, and I'd seen it in the war movies, but I'd finally asked the question to myself, I go, why do that? Why do Heil Hitler? Where's Hitler? He's not there. Who are you heiling? Why are you flying this dumb flag off your balcony? What are you trying to convey? What are you communicating? And then it hit me. What the family that puts that flag off their balcony is communicating is, I am a humble sycophant. I am a non-troublemaker. Don't look to me to think for myself. What I'm signaling by this flag is, if you tell me what to do, including kill a bunch of Jews, I'm ready. Just tell me how many and where and how to do it. So in other words, what this signals is conformity. I will march in lockstep. And what we in America call political correctness now, that's our Gleichschaltung. That's our enforcement of an ideology so rigid that if you're at Google and you write a memo, they'll fire you. And if you're in Hollywood, you write a script that runs athwart the studio bosses, they'll make sure you never work in that town again. And if you're a young professor looking for tenure at Tulane or Oberlin, they'll make sure that your career is squashed. This, to me, is the ugly face of America. It's not the America I fell in love with when I was a kid. It's not the America I believe we want. A lot of our politics now is over which America we're going to have going forward. And I want the America of big possibilities and abundance and choosing your own life and thinking for yourself. An America in which we are all ultimately free to dream our own dreams. Not the dreams of my father, but my own dreams I can dream for myself. It's what Reagan called, in a beautiful moment, morning in America. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's great to be at Texas A&M. If I was at Berkeley and the whole crowd stood up, I'd be looking for the exit. So I believe we have some time for questions, and let's
absolutely.
get started.
I'm going to kind of host a Q&A over here. If anybody who has a question, if you want to come kind of file in from the back there, come on down and just stand behind this pink line. Really appreciate it. Thank you. And whenever you're ready.
All right, let's get started.
Yeah, come on down. All right, how are you?
Doing great. Always enjoyed your movies and all your books, and you're quite an inspiration, especially for many of the people in our Tea Party were part of the auditoscopies that were part of Obama's era. So we really look to you for the inspiration of being able to steadfast through some of that persecution. One question I have is, when they say when you don't have safety, where you can't leave in the old days, you couldn't leave your ranch and know that it would still be there when you got back, and you had no liberty. And we're kind of seeing that now, where we're afraid to step out and be political, to be outspoken, to know that we're going to have a business when we return home, so to speak. And we are, in a sense, losing some of our liberties without having even left our homes. We're seeing a situation where it's hard to be outspoken, and it's easier just to not even be in business in some cases, take your toys and go home. That's one of the biggest downfalls that we're seeing right now, is so many people are taking their toys and going home and not playing a part in the capitalist system. I'm really happy that our economy is doing well, but there's still people, what are your words of advice for people who want to try to persevere, such as yourself, and be able to be outspoken and not worry about their ranch not being there when they get home, metaphorically?
That's a very important question, and I think this is actually the fear that has been spreading, particularly in Republican ranks over the past 2 decades. In other words, for a lot of Republicans, they felt they were kind of like the wildebeests on the Nature Channel. And that is to say, you're going to be eaten, but you hope it's going to be last. And so there's a sort of a frightened tendency. And by the way, this was actually delightful to the left because they kind of had the Republicans where they wanted them. This is kind of why Trump is so unmanageable. Because Trump has no sense of this. Trump basically, not only is he's the wildebeest who actually charges against the lion. And the lion begins to retreat. I have found in my own life that there's a certain safety in being completely on the front line. Now, this seems absolutely crazy. My wife doesn't totally agree with me on this. But my view is that, for example, when I was in the confinement center, locked up for 8 months overnight with hardened felons, I realized that there's only one guy in this entire group of 160 of us, all sleeping in dormitories. And some of them white-collar guys, but many of them not. And I realized there's only one guy in this entire group who's going to walk out of here and have his career just the same as it was before, and that's me. Why? Because I'm a public figure, and everybody knows my case. And so if I come out, people aren't going to say, hey, you're a doctor and you overprescribe pain medicine and you'll never get another patient again. Your career's finished. You better go sell real estate. That was the condition facing white-collar guys in confinement. Their lives were destroyed. But mine wasn't. Why not? Because ultimately, my case was public. It was out there. And in fact, when Trump came on the phone, the first thing he goes to me, he goes, man, he goes, you know, I've known about this case for a long time. He goes, man, you got screwed. He knew that before he became president. Now, it took Senator Ted Cruz to put the question to Trump and say, hey, will you pardon this guy? And Trump goes, done. Done. So be brave. It can pay off.
Thank you.
Hey, Dinesh. I'm a big fan of your work, but I do have one question. I've been following your stuff ever since before 2015, but I was wondering, in the GOP primary, if you don't mind me asking, who did you vote for?
Well, this question actually is a question that I not only don't, it's not that I don't want to answer, I can't answer because in the GOP primary, I couldn't vote. See, when I was convicted of a felony which took away all my rights, so I couldn't vote. Now, I made a movie, Hillary's America, and I will say my wife and I were actually married by Rafael Cruz, Ted Cruz's dad. And I mentioned this just to give you an idea that that's a little bit where our politics are. But the moment that Trump became the nominee, I came on the Trump bandwagon. Why? Because I know American politics is fought in teams. And at the end of the day, it's a team that makes things happen. And so I was never a Trumper or any of that. And I must say, I've been amazed at Trump's ability, almost single-handedly, to take on what would seem to be invincible odds and still keep standing. I mean, controversies that any other Republican would be down on the floor. And this is what has surprised the left. Okay, we got Trump, Stormy Daniels. Okay, Stormy Daniels. And Trump is like, Stormy Daniels, what else you got? So,
Thank you.
My question is a simple one, Dinesh. I agree with you when you said tonight that the left owns the educational institutions in America. And given that, I have a hard time not being cynical about the future of our country. What can we do to turn that around?
In the longer term, we have to transform the climate. And by this I mean not necessarily even transform the institutions, which may be really hard. If you could figure out a way to deliver educational services at a fraction of the cost, you would transform the whole system. The whole structure would begin to topple. But in the short term, there's a great incendiary power in facts. And this is actually why I enjoy speaking on campus. I don't like to bloviate. I try to put out the telling fact. So for example, on one of the campuses I spoke at recently, I stood up and I said, in 1860, the year of the Civil War, year before the Civil War, no Republican owned a slave. I said, not no Republican leader owned a slave. no Republican in the United States owned a slave. And the beauty of this kind of statement is first of all, it appears, to my knowledge, in no high school or college textbook. It has never, to my knowledge, been in a book. It's never been on the History Channel. It's not on Wikipedia. And yet, there it is, fighting words. And it's a scientific statement in the sense it's beautifully refutable. All you have to do is give me the name of one Republican who owned a slave. I would have to take it back. But to this moment, 2 years since I first said this, not a single valid counterexample has surfaced. One guy wrote me from the University of Michigan several months ago. He goes, Dinesh, I gotcha. Ulysses S. Grant owned a slave, a solitary slave, mind you, on his wife's side. And I go, nice try, pal. And that's an almost touche, but I have to point out to you at the time that this happened, and in fact it did happen, Ulysses S. Grant was a Democrat. So now the beauty of this kind of stuff that I'm talking about now is young people can check it out. If I say that the racist Dixiecrats never became Republicans, 95% of them remain in the Democratic Party, they died as Democrats, you could pull out your phone and check it out in 5 seconds and see if what I'm saying is true. So the incendiary power of facts and the ability to check them out very quickly allows you to call into question whole narratives, massive works that have been produced by BS artists of great subtlety and cleverness and elaborated over decades can be knocked down with a single battering ram of facts. And a lot of my movies and books are aimed at doing exactly that. So that's, to me, a first step.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Dinesh, I'm a little nervous, but so you pointed out that there's been a change in morality. If you could pick a point in time, where would you say morality began to change? For me, I say it really started when we began redefining marriage, which I believe affected the family, the most fundamental piece of society. What's your take on that?
My take on it is this, that what could be called the new morality, the morality of the inner self, it was there in Western culture even 100 years ago. 100 years ago, you'd have to go to the left bank of Paris and Greenwich Village in New York to find bohemian communities which appeal to this new morality. But it was not mainstream. It was confined to those enclaves. And what really changed starting around 1960 is that this bohemian morality, which was considered weird, outlandish, whacked, began to permeate into the mainstream of society. And that was the popularization, you might say, of bohemian morality, which has now become, you may say, our morality. Okay?
Thank you.
Hi, Dinesh. I'm Sanjay. As a conservative Indian American student here at A&M, I really look up to your political significance. And I was wondering, what type of tips do you have for students like myself to gain that level of political significance?
The question is how to educate yourself as a political conservative. And I think the answer is to stay enmeshed in the world, which you are, but also to recognize that there are important thinkers and important books that don't answer immediate questions, but that do answer permanent questions. When I was in my 20s, there was no Fox, and I didn't look up to radio hosts. My heroes were people like Irving Kristol and Solzhenitsyn and Friedrich Hayek and the economist Milton Friedman and William F. Buckley. And so these were figures of philosophical, historical, economic, intellectual weight. To me, one of the saddest things about today is I look around the world and I look around at the American landscape and I don't see replacements for those figures the way they were then. Whereas today's Hayek, for example. And so the charlatanism of our own day is more difficult to take on because we don't have the figures to do it. So I would recommend that you try to develop your mind at the philosophical level as well as at the contemporary level. And that combination, which is the key to my books, they're all anchored in history and philosophy. When I do debates, even with atheists about God, I don't appeal to the authority of Scripture. I appeal to history, philosophy, anthropology, modern physics, and so doing it that way, you speak a common vocabulary that the other side can understand. So I would suggest pushing in that direction.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
Howdy. So I noticed, you call this tour the Fake History Debunked Tour. Here at Texas A&M, I'm a history major. The reasons for that, or the wisdom of being a history major, may be questionable, but just as you pointed out, your books are based around history and philosophy, and my experience so far throughout A&M and much of what I've seen in academia is in the revisionist category, the revisionist thought. How can I, as a conservative, combat that? How is that going to be done through the academic field, or is this going to have to be done through other mediums?
Excellent question. Another way to frame the question is like this. How do people come to know things that aren't true? And the answer is something like this. A lot of our contemporary debate is based upon premises that are themselves never questioned. So let's say, for example, someone goes, Trump is a fascist. Now, this idea is based upon a bigger idea that is not stated. Fascism is on the right. Fascism is on the right. If fascism weren't on the right, it would make no sense to call Trump a fascist. If fascism were a leftist phenomenon, calling Trump a fascist would make no sense. The idea that fascism is on the right is embedded in I learned it as an undergraduate in college. Now, the reason young people come to know things that aren't true is that a professor writes a book, which is then acclaimed by his like-minded fellow professors whom he asks to write blurbs on the book. Great book, wonderful book, path-breaking book. A new understanding of Nazism will never be the same. And then pretty soon the New York Review of Books writes a review in the New York Times, and NPR then interviews the guy, and suddenly he's on the History Channel, and then Michael Moore comes rolling in to make a documentary on the guy, or a feature film. So what happens is you, the ordinary guy, then go, wow, fascism must be on the right. Why? Because my professor said something about it. I walked into Barnes & Noble, I saw a book about it, I heard something on NPR, and then I put in Wikipedia, there it is. So even though that's the same bullet ricocheting off 7 walls and coming at you from different directions, you go, wow, it's confirmed. It was here, it was there, it was everywhere. It's got to be true, and this Dinesh guy's got to be lying to us. This is what our fight is all about. Almost all of what we call history is progressive history that was written by a revisionist school of progressives starting in the 1940s. Progressivism goes back to much earlier in the century, but I'm talking about the progressive domination of the textbooks. And so after World War II, many progressive scholars who, by the way, knew that fascism was on the left, they had been there, they had seen it, but they go, if people think this in the future, it will make us look bad. We need to redefine fascism. We need to move it into the right-wing column. We need to be able to use it against our political opponents. And so this cunning act of sort of intellectual massaging, it's not outright lies, it's spinning the facts in a way favorable to your presuppositions. And what historical era hasn't done that? What historical community doesn't do that? So part of, I think, today is to revise the revisionists, to apply academic standards, but we live in a culture where you've got to get the message out. That's why I make movies. I was a think tank guy for many years, and then I go, I'm reaching a very limited audience. The left is making movies, not just documentaries, they're making romantic comedies and thrillers, they're smuggling political messages into all that stuff, so gee, I gotta make movies. Now, how do I make movies? I'm at the American Enterprise Institute of Hoover, it's really hard. Then I was like, well, Michael Moore can do it. That guy's really dumb. If he could do it, how hard can it be? Okay, next question.
Thank you. This will be the last question here.
Hey, Dinesh. Big fan of your work, so thank you for coming out. I'm currently interviewing at medical schools right now for next fall, and at these interviews they always ask us, or they always tell us that the healthcare system is messed up, and everything costs too much, and what we would do to fix the healthcare system in America. And so, as a prominent conservative and as a former political advisor for Reagan, I was wondering what are some of your public policy prescriptions for the healthcare system?
The question is about healthcare. And what makes this debate so interesting is that the premise of the claim for healthcare reform is quite true. Medical care in America is really costly. Prescriptions are really costly. Operations are really costly. And if you actually review the bill, you're amazed at how simple procedures cost tens of thousands of dollars. Now the question you have to ask, which is always the hard question, is why is that the case? Now the Obama assumption, and it was an assumption never documented, never proven, is essentially this is the capitalist system run amok. But if you look at healthcare, you realize, first of all, that it is very different than any other capitalist transaction in one significant way. And that is that the guy receiving the service never pays. That's not true if you go into H-E-B and buy a carton of milk, you pay. And the key to understanding why healthcare costs so much has to do with that. Let's do a thought experiment. Let's say we were to say that food is a right. Not exactly a controversial statement. If healthcare is a right, obviously eating is going to be a right. Food to live, that's a right. Okay, it's your right. And so from now on, we're going to say everybody has a right, an entitlement to food. And the government can't tell you what to eat. So when you go to H-E-B next time, you just decide how much you want. You fill up your cart. And so what's going to happen? Everybody's going to pile up their cart to the top. 17 cartons of milk. Now the grocery store, knowing this, knowing that people are going to overconsume, is going to say, this is fantastic. Let's raise the price. And so milk, instead of costing $2, now costs $17. And your grocery bill, instead of being $140, ends up being $780. But the beauty of it is you don't care because you're not paying. Some other guy is going to be paying. So what happens here is, if you really think about what's really going on here, is it is a collusion between you, the customer, and the grocery store to screw some third guy, who's the guy who's actually going to pay the bill. That's what's going on with healthcare. And Obama fully understood this, and Obama realized that what he was portraying publicly to be a collusion between him and the American people against the evil insurance companies was actually the exact opposite. Because behind closed doors, Obama was meeting with the insurance companies and saying, listen, I got a deal for you. I want a government takeover of healthcare. You won't like that. However, here's what I'm going to give you in return. I'm going to force millions of Americans who don't have healthcare, some of whom don't need healthcare or don't want healthcare and certainly don't want to pay for healthcare, I'm going to make them pay. And that means tens of millions of new customers for you. So we have a great market here where we're going to force the consumer to buy. It's kind of like making a law that you have to go to the grocery store and buy broccoli. The government's going to make you do it. The broccoli industry would be pretty excited. Everyone's going to be forced. And so what happened is the insurance companies came on board, noticed that they were all running ads in favor of Obamacare. If they were the evil insurance companies that he was fighting, why would they support Obamacare? Because behind the scenes, you're just seeing the tip of the iceberg. Oh, we're reforming healthcare. So a lot of American politics is completely based on a supreme confidence in the stupidity of the American people. Sometimes justified, we have to admit. But here you are at a prestigious university, you have critical thinking skills. Don't be a sucker. Begin to realize that someone's going to pay. And the only question is, who's going to pay? So the left's definition of social justice, to broaden this discussion and bring my talk to a close, basically there are two competing definitions of social justice. The left has an idea that social justice is this, and I want to give you my idea of social justice. My idea of social justice is I keep what I earn, and you keep what you earn. Unless you can show that I'm ripping you off. If I am doing better than you or you're doing better than me, it's of no consequence. The brain surgeon has the same right to keep the revenues of what he earns as the street sweeper has to keep the revenues of what he or she earns. That's the key to social justice. There's a case at Harvard right now
in which essentially Harvard, the most prestigious university in the country, is arguing that it has a right to discriminate against Asian Americans. Why? Not because Asian Americans are discriminating against anybody. Not because they even did so in the past. It is for the sole reason that they are outcompeting others. They are overrepresented as an ethnic group, and Harvard knows that if it wants to raise the level of underrepresented groups, it cannot do it without reducing the level of overrepresented groups. They never say it, but they know it, and they've been practicing this kind of racial discrimination behind closed doors for 30 years and lying about it. And the significance of this case is that they are finally forced, the lying Harvard admissions department is forced to say, yes, this is what we're doing, and now they're trying to convince Asian Americans, you got to be okay with it. This is not a case of saying that we're trying to undo the present effects of past discrimination. This is screwing over a group that has itself been discriminated against, that was itself excluded by racist immigration laws, that was itself kept out of unions, by racist democratic unions excluded them. So a group with this history, and the same could be said of Jews, because the same thing is going on behind closed doors. So this is the dirty secret of progressive social justice. And look, at the very least, we need to have an argument about it, and that requires intellectual diversity. At the very least, we need to out the facts. And so if we're all going to be such cowards that we're willing to go along without even questioning the system, intimidated by, you're a racist. No, I'm not a racist. I'm actually trying to figure out what makes sense in the world, and if you're going to call that racist, there's something wrong with you, not with me. That's the atmosphere we need. I hope that I can invite you to think about it, and if you believe in it, fight for it. Thank you very much. Giga Maggie, see you later. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Thank you.